I learned a lot about apocalyptic resistance literature from Margaret Thatcher, at least more than I would have expected. Yeah, that Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister of the late 20th century, that one. And yeah, when I say apocalyptic literature of resistance, I mean the book of Revelation. Here's what I mean. There's a great line that I have heard attributed to Margaret Thatcher that goes something like this: being powerful is like being an elegant lady. If you have to tell people you are one, you aren't. Right? It makes sense, right? If you have to go telling people that you're classy, if you have to go around telling people that you're from the hoi polloi, that you're of the upper crust, you aren't. If you have to tell people you're powerful without them just knowing from the way you act and the authority you carry, you aren't. If you have to go around making a lot of bluster, it's smoke and mirrors. It's not the real thing. But genuine power has this way of speaking without having to bully, without having to rattle sabers, without having to intimidate. Genuine power is different, maybe even more so than Margaret Thatcher imagined. That's honestly why I find it so surprising and subversive to read from the scriptures the story, the passage that we're going to be looking at this coming Sunday, for the fourth Sunday of Easter, as we continue looking through the book of Revelation at songs that are at one level throne room songs of God's triumph, but also deeply subversive. See, here's what I mean. Like I say, throughout history, the bullies and the blowhards and the empires, they always have to talk big and make themselves look impressive. They're always calling themselves winners and picking their opponents and calling them losers or saying they're weak. And they always have to puff up how strong and powerful, important, and impressive they are. Listen to the adjectives that demagogues use like that and how they make themselves sound big and important and make everybody else seem weak and ineffectual. That's a sign they're overcompensating, right? It's why the German war machine in World War II named their tanks things like Panzer and had these impressive sounding names like Blitzkrieg, Lightning War, and Stormtroopers. But resistance movements, they took the names things like the White Rose because they didn't need to intimidate. They spoke a resistance that wasn't bent on domination and violence. Same thing happens in the scriptures as well. And there's no need to bully, there's no need to bluster, there's no need to rattle sabers, there's no need to wow people with shock and awe. There's instead this surprising image of a lamb who doesn't turn into something else, a lamb who doesn't turn into a lion or a wolf or a tiger. Instead, there is a lamb, and only a lamb, only ever a lamb. Book of Revelation, there's this fantastic throne room scene where we get to see the very dwelling of God in what looks like a royal throne room of the ancient first century. And there at the center is this throne, and there, like underneath, right by the altar, somehow in the altar, underneath it, it's kind of confusing, there is this lamb who looks as though he's been slaughtered, slain, and is somehow alive again. And every first century Christian goes, oh, that's Jesus. He's the one who was slain and is alive again. He's the one who is the lamb. And of course, even in the Greek of the book of Revelation, it's not powerful, big, tough ram like with big old horns. It's it's the diminutive word for lamb, like lambikins. There's this small, little, vulnerable lamb whose appearance is that it's been slaughtered and is alive again. And at the center of the book of Revelation is that figure as the one who is Lord of all creation and reigns and is worthy of all praise, as a slap in the face to the empire of the first century, and for that matter, every other empire, bully, blowhard, and demagogue ever since. The throne room scene goes a little bit like this. After I looked, I saw there was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, robed in white with palm branches in their hands. They cried in a loud voice, saying, "Salvation belongs to our God who is seated on the throne and to the Lamb." And all the creatures and angels stood around the throne, and the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces and fell before the throne and worshiped God, singing, "Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever." Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, "Who are these robed in white, and where have they come from?" I said to him, "Sir, you are the one who knows." Then he said to me, "They are the ones who have come out of the great ordeal. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God and worship him day and night within his temple. And the one who is seated on the throne will shelter them. They will hunger no more and thirst no more. The sun will not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." It's a musical. It really is a musical. People in this heavenly throne room, in this sort of show-stopping number, breaking into song with a curtain call of all the cast of the whole heavenly host and all this innumerable crowd from every nation and language, every skin color, every ethnicity, every cultural background, all there. And who's at the center? Not a conquering king, not somebody having to brag about themselves about how powerful or awesome they are, but a lamb, this vulnerable lamb whose power isn't crushing his enemies, but having been crushed, having been slaughtered, and being alive again. And there's this beautiful and surprising image that caught me off guard looking at this text this year. There's this beautiful and surprising phrase where it says, "The Lamb will be their shepherd." That's amazing, isn't it? It's this image of not that we need someone bigger and tougher to bully away any predators, or somebody who's got a big stick to smack away the wolves, or keep any sheep-stealing marauders from stealing them, but instead, it's the Lamb. This vulnerable creature is all we need to be our shepherd. This vision is God's kind of power is in vulnerability. God's kind of power is in suffering love. God's kind of victory is in a cross and resurrection, not in destroying God's enemies or conquering their territory or taking them over. God doesn't need to punch down. God doesn't need to talk about other people being weak or losers or lowly or something like that. God doesn't have to puff up God's own toughness or stroke God's own ego. Instead, at the center of everything, there's this lamb, this little vulnerable lamb. To be a follower of Jesus is to confess that that's really what God is like. God's power is this upside-down kind of power. And that what we most deeply need is not bigger and bigger weapons or stronger and stronger fists to punch our enemies, or a bigger empire or a bigger bully or a louder megaphone to shout down at people. But God's way of gathering people from everywhere, all creation, is this kind of suffering love that shows up in this weak and vulnerable, slaughtered but risen and living lamb. We are sent out into the world, not to announce that everybody should come to our church or follow our religion because we're bigger and tougher and we're the winners and they're the losers unless they join our team. But rather, we're sent out as vulnerably as the little slain but risen lamb to say God's power, God's way of ruling is in the love that lays its life down for the beloved, for a whole world that includes people from everywhere. Instead of us withdrawing into our own little compartments and segments of people who are like us, people who look like us, talk like us, think like us, dress like us, like the same kind of music or culture as us, we're instead sent out into a wide world as diverse and different as all of creation itself. And to say, God draws you all, and God's way of gathering you in is not to threaten you or cajole you, you better get in or else, but instead to compel us with power of the suffering love that goes to a cross. That's where we're turned this coming Sunday, and in a sense, all our lives long. Come join us this coming Sunday for that kind of a conversation about the God who doesn't need to brag or boast or go around telling everybody how strong and tough God is, the God whose power is seen visibly in suffering love. See you Sunday.